Well, I was going to do a whole presentation on a brand new phone that Apple would produce, but Steve kind of stole my wind, actually. So I'm going to change directions a little bit here today, and we're going to talk about creating dynamic interfaces with Flash and databases. Okay, and this track here, the Inspire track, is new to Macworld, and the intent of this track is to have individuals like myself come in and show you applications or solutions that we've created, and then reverse engineer it a bit. Rather than the let me show you a technique and then build up to the big payoff of and here's the cool solution where we've done this. We're going to start off with a real quick case study, show you an application that was developed in Flash with a database on the back end. And I've picked one particular database that I'm going to talk about here today. But I want to make one thing, it's important before we get started that I make one thing clear, and that is the only thing, and I'll get around to when we talk about these things called URL commands or strings. But the database that I've chosen, since it's Macworld, I've chosen a very Apple-friendly database. And for those of you that maybe haven't worked with databases too much thus far, or have worked with Flash, but you really you want to kind of get a good start. I've picked one that's actually really easy to use, and it's called FileMaker. And before you all tear out of here, I beg you to give it a chance, because I chose it because it's extremely easy to set up. It's very easy to, it's very versatile, and if you haven't worked with FileMaker Pro in a while, you're going to find out that the server end and the web serving capabilities are much stronger than they were even just a couple of years ago. But the key is that the things I'm going to show you, the techniques I'm showing you as far as how to parse out data and work with XML and some of the stuff that we're going to get to throughout the demonstration, works the same no matter what database you've got on the back end. As a matter of fact, I can take these same files that I'm going to show you today, and I could change some of the string around, some of the syntax of the call that's being made to the database, and load database from a different source. As a matter of fact, we've created applications that pull data from FileMaker, pull data in from a web service, all into one app, and they all work together. So, and then at the end of the session, I'm going to give you a website address where you can download all the different files, all the Flash files and the FileMaker files that I'm working with today. And I promise you, it's a ton of code. A couple of years ago when I first started doing this, I would have never imagined I'd be foolish enough to give away this much code. But I've reached that level of craziness. So if you're willing to stick around, or at least if you sneak out and sneak back in elegantly enough, I'll give you that information at the end of the session, and then you'll be able to play around with it a little bit. And what you'll be able to do is, if you're more familiar with another database, or you've got some, let's say a SQL server set up somewhere, and you're familiar with the syntax, you can plug that syntax into these same Flash files and work a little bit with parsing out this information. I'm hoping by the end of this session I will have given you the tools to be comfortable with doing this. So to get started here, just by a show of hands, how many of you work with Flash? Excellent. And how many of you work with databases as well? Okay, I probably should have played the memory game in my head a little bit here. So a good portion of you are working with the databases and Flash integrated together already. Now, the angle I'm going to show you a little bit today is about actually creating applications. The main case study I'm going to show you is an application that was created to be distributed on a network rather than through a browser. And it's kind of an interesting deployment of Flash and databases together. But again, it's the same principle of embedding something inside of a browser. But since an application in many cases requires a little bit meatier programming, I thought it would be a good demonstration here this afternoon. So, real quick, just to give you an idea, my name is Cris Ippolite, and my email address is up here on screen. And I believe it's in the, if you've got some slides or some paperwork as well, that information should be in there. And I urge you to drop me a line anytime you're working on something or have a thought. I get emails from people all the time who've been in sessions and classes, and it's always nice to get a new perspective on things. And if you have a simple question or if it's anything that we've covered, by all means, drop me a line. And I'm a consultant with a company called iSolutions down in Los Angeles, and we do a lot of work. We were primarily started off as a FileMaker development company, which should be no surprise why I've chosen that particular database for today's demonstration. But we've worked a lot with merging the two of those together to build some applications. And the application that I'm going to show you today is for an organization you probably have heard of before. And and it's a bit timely now that we're getting into the movie awards season. And the creme de la creme of all those awards shows is the Oscars. That happens in February this year. And the application that we've created for them that I'm going to show you today is one that's used every year to seat everybody inside the Kodak Theater for the Oscars. So when you get those camera shots on ABC of all the stars sitting there and all their little positions that seem to be a coincidence that the co-star happens to be sitting right over the shoulder of the main star of the movie. That is not a coincidence by any means. It's done through managing all this through this application that you're going to see here today. And believe it or not, it's all done in FileMaker. Most of the Academy of Motion Pictures data is managed by FileMaker Pro. And I'll show you a couple of different ones. I've got some other examples at the end of the session that I'll show you as well. And what I wanted to do is first, before I show you the application, I wanted to give you an idea what their legacy application looks like. So before we came in and we built this, they had a pretty interesting way to do this in place. And with the help of my lovely assistant, Vanna, we'll give you an idea of this really rich application. So believe it or not, for many, many years, this is an organization that makes ad revenue of over $100 million just on the day of the television broadcast. So it's certainly not a budget issue. I'm not sure what. But you see, there was literally, this is actually a, oh yeah, we lost Jamie Foxx, but that's okay. We'll get him back here. But literally, up until just a few years ago, this seating chart was printed out on large format printing. And these, I'm not sure if you've heard of these before, they're called Post-its. They're really starting to catch on. They write down on these little pieces of paper the individuals' names, and then they stick them onto the seats. Now, as insane as that sounds, they keep this in a certain room that's locked down, and the security guards won't let you in there. And at some point, the ABC production staff actually needs to work with this information. And in the way that they network this, and Jeffrey will show you right now, they roll it up and try not to lose any of the Post-its while they're doing that, and then that goes courier across town somewhere where this information gets shared. So thank you, Jeffrey. That worked even better than rehearsal. Appreciate it. So the first, and then after all that information is added on this board, they will then transcribe it into a database, of course, because they need, for reports and to print tickets and all the different things that they need to do as far as communicating all of this. And what we did is we built an application. Originally, we just had a database in FileMaker that took all the guests and brought all these guests into, oh, by the way, I forgot to handle the legal part of this. If I'm going to be showing the Oscar symbol on screen, I need to make sure it's protected. But ultimately, what we ended up doing is we created an application inside of Flash, and here you see it actually live over at the Academy, and what they've got is a series of about a dozen or so little tablet computers that they walk around the Kodak Theater with, all the way up until the actual awards show itself. But on a wireless network and a secured wireless network, they're walking around checking seating locations, and they can make changes and do different things like that. In the application that you're seeing running here, I'm going to give you a look-see at. Oh, okay, great. Here we go. Now, the interface I've mocked up for demo purposes a little bit, but what I wanted to demonstrate here to you is just a simple FileMaker database, and I've appled it up quite a bit. I mean, it's certainly taken some liberties with some of the colors and style here that you're looking at. And I'm using some things that are called a web viewer, and this is another interesting reason why FileMaker is a good choice, because it's got a unique function to it that I'll discuss a little bit later that allows you to actually embed web browser functionality right into the layout of your database. So if you've worked with other database applications and layout tools before, imagine being able to extend that functionality by embedding it, and it actually can pull data from your local record as well. So what you're seeing here, for instance, in the case of this Google search, we see on the record that we're looking at right now, it happens to be a nominee for Best Actor for Samuel L. Jackson in Snakes on a Plane. Just one man's hope and dream. But What we've done here is on this particular record, when you're looking at, for instance, if you look at the tab for IMDb, you notice this little thing here. It says loading. And what it's actually doing is it's going out and dynamically doing a search based on whatever the person's name is and pulling all that data into this layout. And the reason I'm showing you this is because since it's a browser engine, and it will run anything that runs in a browser. For example, we've looked at websites here, or it could be QuickTime movies or sound or anything that can be hosted up on a web server and played in a browser. We also know that Flash or SWF files can also play inside of a browser, so this allows us to embed it directly inside of our application. As a matter of fact, here you'll see that I've got one of the rendered versions of the Kodak orchestra pit right here inside the FileMaker layout. Now, let's take a look at the application here. What I'm doing here is actually just launching a Flash application that brings us to a rendered version of the Kodak Theater. And you see we've got some data here on how many total seats are in each one of these sections. And that data is coming in from FileMaker Pro. And after showing you this application, we're going to go through and I'm going to show you all the different ways that we can pull data in and parse that data out. And again, I'll make sure that everybody has those files when we're done here today. But just to kind of continue the tour here, you can then choose, and again, this is normally run on a tablet computer, so individuals who are running the tablet, they can toggle from this screen to the other window and back and forth. And for demonstration purposes, I have it opening up in a separate window here. But what happens on screen then is you'll notice that anybody who's already been seated, so what they do is they have all the people that they know. It might be a little bit different from a normal venue where people just buy tickets and then they seat them as they buy tickets. But here what they do is they go through this really high-tech process of figuring out who gets to go to the actual award show, and then they seat them all accordingly. And once seated, you see that this information can be queried from the database. So right here what I happen to be doing is I happen to be searching the database table and asking it who is in seat in the center section, row A, seat 5, for example, in that case. And also, if I click on a seat, you see we've got one of the studio guests that now gets attached to the cursor here. What I'm actually doing there is I'm using a record ID and I'm identifying a particular guest and then dropping them back down on another seat. And what I've done is I've found a record in a table and I've modified the data inside that record, inside the table, or the row, or the column, if you so prefer. And in order to add them, now again, we've got Samuel L. Jackson over here. He's the only person left in this demonstration. Everybody else has been seated except for Samuel L. Jackson, and then all these little green areas here, that's actually where the seat fillers come into play. But what we want is, depending on what section you're on, and in this case we happen to be on the orchestra section, we want it to query this database and tell us all of the people who've yet to be seated. So we're actually doing it, we're querying a couple of different tables in this case. But again, what I want to impress upon you is all that's really happening is a search inside a database table. So what happens is this list here, we call it the pick list. This list pops up and shows us all the people in the orchestra section who've yet to be seated, and allows us to interact with the database. Now what I'm doing is I'm isolating the record by selecting it inside of Flash. So this is where you leverage your skills inside of Flash. Like you know how you can make this stuff on screen, and you can create a little seat or an object that way, or you can create all the motion that's happening on screen. But when you attach to those things like seats and having a seat change color, but when you attach to it, and I'm going to show you, I'm just going to use the example of a button here in just a moment, but when you attach the database interactivity to those things that you already know in Flash, you're able to build these really dynamic applications. So now you'll see that our Samuel L. Jackson has been seated, and you'll notice here that here's a window, or in FileMaker they're called portals, that shows you the table that shows where everybody has been seated. And what you'll notice is, if we can kind of see it in the background here, when that list comes up again, so what I've done is I've just created a record now. Again, we've seen how I can edit, how I can add records, and then now the same logic goes with deleting records. So if I click on the Samuel L. Jackson and click on the trash can, you'll notice over here that instantly the data has disappeared from the related table in this case. So any application that you're creating, you can boil it down to the ability to add a record, or edit, or delete, or search on data inside of a table. Question?
So to modify the record on the server, meaning that everyone with their separate tablets immediately has that information that it's gone.
Yeah, exactly. The question, or the comment was, to clarify that once that activity happened and this record is deleted, in fact, what that actually does mean is that anybody else who's networked into this system, all the other, let's say, 100 or so people that could be looking at it at this time, instantly that data record disappears, and anybody who's got a client access to it will see that. Now, there is one important part to that, and that is, when you've got the Flash application here, you'll notice up here in the upper right-hand corner, I'm tracking users. In this case, what we've done is we've added something on the server side that's called a Java class, or we've modified a Java class, and so we've got the Java running in the background. I've actually got it on a different identity. We just open up our terminal on the server, and we say start on this particular port, this class that we've identified and created. And what that does is it watches for changes in the tables in the database, and then pushes those changes out to all the different users. So if Jeffrey was logged on to this very same thing when I just added the record of Samuel L. Jackson in the front row, if he was just staring right at his screen, instantly those seats would turn from green to red, and they would be filled in already. So it's fully networked, all sorts of concurrent users can see the same exact thing. But keep in mind, it's just like an application, any other application on the network. If you're using your ACT sales database or something that you have networked at the office, if you change somebody's phone number and commit that record, everybody else will see that change reflected. And the same thing is true here when you've got a Flash and database application where those two components are combined. So let's talk a little bit about, and again, this is how we actually deploy it. So when people are walking around, if you look really closely this February, and they do the crowd shots, see if you can see some people walking around with some tablets, and at least you can say, yeah, I know what's going on there, and frankly, I'm amazed it's FileMaker, but I know there's some Flash involved too. So we'll see if, in fact, you get to catch any of that. So what's going on here is this. Now, those of you that have worked with databases in any capacity know in sort of the computer science realm, there's these things called layers. And it's really more of a mindset when it comes to developing applications. There are what's commonly referred to as a presentation layer, and then there's a data layer. So the data layer just simply contains the data. It's where the data is stored, where you work on the security aspect of it and how to retrieve the data. And then the presentation layer is where the user actually interfaces with this. That's where you put a lot of the logic as well. You'll build in a lot of logic. So for example, when we're using Flash as the presentation layer and FileMaker as the back end, what that allows us to do, you all know, most of you in here are working with Flash already, and you know that it's really got limitless potential when it comes to what you can do with vector graphics and what you can do within authoring Flash inside that environment. But database tools, they don't really have that. They don't really have the luxury of that. As a matter of fact, most other databases, if we forget FileMaker for a second and we look at things like MySQL or any other kind of SQL Server or different database sources like that, they all require another application to design the user interface, whether it be web technologies or something that can be deployed on the network, things like VB or stuff like that as well. But Flash is particularly well suited for this. Obviously, because of its reach, this is some interesting data there that currently Flash reaches 97.7% of internet-connected PCs. Now, back in 2000, when I would have the discussion with people, I'd have to say, yeah, okay, the caveat here is someone could go to your site or try to run your application, and they might not have a Flash player installed. But it's safe to say these days. Actually, I would be amazed if someone had a personal computer that is even mildly up to date that doesn't inherently have a Flash player installed. The only thing that you need to be mindful of these days is if you're using technologies that are specific to the most current version of Flash, then maybe someone would need like a Flash Player 9 instead of a Flash Player 6 or something like that. But the stuff that I'm showing you here is not specific to the most. For instance, I'll be using Flash Professional 8. but the XML object that I'm going to demonstrate here in a moment isn't specific to 8. This is actually something that has been around for a few versions, so you're not going to run into those things. If somebody's got Flash Player 6 installed on their browser and their application, you'll be able to do all the stuff that I'm going to show you here today, regardless. So what I'm proposing to you here today is creating applications and having the data layer be handled by, and in this case I'm just showing you FileMaker because it's just easy for us to do on the fly and still powerful enough to drive an application like this. But in any one of the circumstances, I definitely am suggesting that Flash is an excellent presentation layer tool. So for those of you that have been developing Flash-based applications just for the web, what I'm really hoping to do here today is kind of impress upon you that you've already got the skill set. For example, myself and Vanna, we come from the database space. So I do this presentation to database professionals, and they sit and they look at Flash and they go, oh my God, this is amazing. How did you do that? And can you make my logo go on fire too and spin around? That would be awesome. And they haven't the faintest idea where to start with that, right? So you guys are way ahead of the game. You already know how to do all the cool stuff and the flaming logos and how to, create a rendered vector-based version of the Kodak Theater. And so you can cheat a little bit by me just showing you how to plug data on the back end, and all of a sudden you're not just web designers anymore, you're full application designers. And you know what that means? You can increase your rates enough to pay for this trip to Macworld. So if you kind of put your charlatan filter on a little bit there, that's actually where I'm trying to lead you with this. But, and before I jump into the demos, one more slide of PowerPoint hell here. But the idea here is this. This is how the principle works. Flash's action script allows for the integration with dynamic data. A long time ago, and the very first demo I'm going to show you is an old version. Are you guys familiar, show of hands, with the action script of loading variables, or the technique of loading variables? Right, so long ago, when you wanted to do something dynamic on your website, what you actually did was have a text file on your server somewhere, and then you just change that text file somehow and you load that into Flash. Well, that has evolved. It went from load variables into some other iterations of that, and now there's something that's really important. It's the XML object with an action script. And that's what makes all of this run. And the reason that that came about is because instead of just having text files out there, the advent or the acceptance or the wide range acceptance of XML as the document or the protocol for which to exchange data became more prevalent, especially in the web or with databases in the database world as well. So what's interesting now is that Flash has the ability to compile a URL request. And you know what a URL request is for those that aren't working with web applications? When you go to Google and you type in search for free stuff or iPhone, and then you see on the address bar that all sorts of gobbledygook loads up there. Well, actually that's what's called the URL string, and there's all sorts of syntax in there that carries with it the location of where the Google databases are, and what information you're searching for, what your search parameters are, and how you want that information returned to you. And I'm going to dissect those here in a moment. And I'm going to show you what FileMaker's URL requests are, so you can kind of see how just by changing the syntax of those, we can either add a record, edit a record, delete a record, or search for data. And if you recall, when I was doing the tour of the Kodak Theater database, any action that I could possibly perform there was doing one of those or a combination of those things. So Flash can compile those strings and send it through a TCP connection to the database server. So half the battle is done right there. So Flash, the application, can actually author these and make these requests to a database. Tons of different databases. Any database that can spit out XML, which is pretty much any database that you would want to use, you can then communicate with it in Flash. Now, FileMaker, much like all these other databases, can respond to a request, and we'll see that here in a second. So now they're talking with each other. So Flash makes a request over to FileMaker. FileMaker can respond with an XML document, and to fully complete the circle, Flash has the ability to parse out that data, not load the full XML document, because when we take a look at it, you'll see it's pretty verbose. But it can find just the little nodes or the little individual pieces of data that it needs, bring them into Flash, and display them in any way that you want. So let's take a look at some Flash files and see how this works. And I'll show you some other demonstrations. of some applications like this in a second, but let's jump into Flash. First thing I'm going to do, just for the sake of starting from the beginning, I'm going to show you the demonstration of loading variables into a Flash application. So these are really, all of these Flash files are available at the website that I'm going to give you at the end of the session here. But real simple stuff. All I've done is I've created a couple of different frames. You see I've got the one frame where I've put the Go button, and then on the second frame I'm displaying the data that I've parsed out in a dynamic text field. Okay? As simple as it could possibly get. And I've assigned some action script to this Go button, and what I've done is I've displayed the action script here for you right on screen. So it's just simply loading the variables that are found inside of a text file. And here's what the text file looks like. I'm declaring a variable in the text file. It says var1 equals, in this case, hello world. Okay? So let's test and see how that works. Really, I mean, really simple action script here. And again, this used to be as dynamic as Flash could get long ago. So let's hit that button. Okay, hello world. And just to show you that this is a dynamic process, let's say, let's test that out now. Oh, let me go back. There we go. Give me an iPhone. So back then, the idea used to be if I wanted to, if you have a website or an application built in Flash and you want data to change in there, this was actually pretty revolutionary in the mid-90s because, or mid to late 90s, because before you'd build a Flash website, let's say, and your client would come back, or your boss, or whoever holds the purse strings, and says, yeah, you know how you have it say hello world when you log into the site? That's great and everything, but I want it to say give me an iPhone now. How do I get into can you send me the FLA file and I'll change it myself? Those were scary times. So instead, developers like us, we would go in and say, here's a bunch of text files we're going to put on your web server, and if you want to change the news that's on your site, go to this one, and if you want to change the products that are loading in your store, go here, and you can change those just in a simple text file and then re-upload it to your website and then load it in. Not a bad process, right? It affords certainly some one level of dynamic interface here, but the problem is those text files are not an application that really more than one user can share at the same time. They're not, they don't allow you the ability to make changes on the fly, or when you don't have access to FTP or whatever it is. They can't be shared, and like your question earlier about if one person makes a change, can all the other people see it? Well, they would have to pull that file down, and the process isn't totally dynamic. But you'll see as this has evolved over time, the process got more and more dynamic. Well, load variables, really, there isn't going to be too many people that are going to tell you in this day and age that that's how you should be working with data. But if you just need to load static text that doesn't change ever, or it changes infrequently enough that you can get away with just storing it on a text file, then you're all set. Well, then came the acceptance of XML as a data standard. And XML is a lot like HTML. It's a tag-driven language with its own syntax. But what's unique about XML is it really is it's a document-based language that allows you to not only store the data itself, or the little bits of data. Let me show you a XML file, actually. This is an XML document. I loaded a document called fmresultset.xml into the browser, and the reason I did that is because a lot of browsers, I'm using Firefox, IE, it has the ability to parse these out and let you look at it, but if you want to use Firefox, you can see it breaks it up here, and these, see how it's all indented, and we've got fmresultset on the top, and then it indents to error code and all that. That all actually means something. So when you're looking at, unfortunately, if you open up in Safari, it just will show the data all in one big long string. So in a development environment, you might want to use Firefox to look at it, and they're all collapsible and this type of thing. Now when we talk about parsing, each line, if you think about getting to, let's say what I want to do is I want to take the information here and here. So Alex and Ippolite, I want to get those two pieces of information. I want to pull them out of this XML document, and I want to put them inside a Flash dynamic field. I want to display it on my next frame. That's what we're going to do in the next example. But you notice I'm not declaring any variables or anything here, am I? But what's nice about XML is that it declares its own variables. So you see right here is a good example of it. Field name. There's a field name here, and I'm declaring it. I'm saying this stands for first name. And XML allows me to wrap right underneath, and you notice it's got a relationship to the variable. It goes right below it and indented, which means it's a child of that. So the data for the first name is actually the word Alex. And if we go down one more, I'm declaring another one. The data for the last name is the word Ippolite. Or name Ippolite, I should say, not to disparage my namesake. But so the trick here is navigating through. It was really easy in the text file where we could just say, here's the variable, and anything that follows the equal sign is what I want, is what I'm looking for. But believe it or not, it's actually just as easy to do it here. Because it's already called out. If I'm looking for the first name, I know exactly what point of the document. If this document was 50 pages long, I could still find the first name in there. And that's really the power of XML. So when you hear a lot of people talking about why XML is a big deal, it's very lightweight and there's a worldwide or universal acceptance of it as a protocol. That's a big component of it. But it describes itself. It's text that describes itself, which is a really important part. So when we're talking about parsing things out, and then when we get into parsing things out dynamically, you can see that's going to be a big deal. But the trick here is, how do I get from that line, how do I get from this first line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down, and then I want to indent a little bit. How do we get there? Well, I'm going to introduce you to, there's a couple of different ways you can do it, and I'm going to introduce you to the one that I think is the easiest to wrap your head around, and I'll also tell you about some other options in case you're interested. But right now, we've got a static XML document instead of this document here, which was a text file. So you'll notice that things have changed. I still only have 2 frames here. I've got the first frame where I'm actually I'm loading the data into the SWF, and then in the second frame, I'm going to parse out Alex, and I'm going to parse out Ippolite, and I'm going to pull them into these respective fields. Now, if you see down below, a couple of things to look at here. You'll notice down here, you see, sorry for those of you in the back, I'll move this up a little bit, but these are just dynamic text fields, and I've assigned the variable here is F name for first name, and then the other one is L name for last name. And why do I point that out? Well, if we go back to, and again, don't worry about scribbling a bunch of notes down on this code or anything. I'm giving you these files. You'll be able to play around with these. But if you look here, if we just go through this here, what I'm showing you now is I'm using the XML object within Flash. So it was something that came about a few versions ago with an action script and allowed us to load XML documents into Flash. That's half the battle. The other half of the battle is it gave us the tools necessary to parse out data from those and use them within our Flash application. Now, here we're just displaying data inside fields, but I could be displaying it when I roll over a seat, for example, or I could be displaying it as it's clicked onto my cursor, or I could start it on fire and make it spin around and shoot out into space. Any one of those things. But here, all that we're doing here, when I click on the button, I'm making a declaration here. We've got my XML equals the new XML that I'm pulling in. Well, let me get this out of the way. And the XML file, because we need to say what XML file we're working with in this equation. The XML file, you'll notice that instead of doing hello.txt like I did in the last example, I'm putting in fmresultset.xml. And that's a file. You see, that's an actual file that's here on my desktop. And I'll send that one along to you guys as well. So it's loading the XML file just like it did the text file. But then upon the load, and we'll get to this part in a second. This looks daunting, but it's not as scary as it seems. It's just navigating to the nodes, and then you'll notice that it says, in the place where we've declared the variable F name, find the data at the end of this path and insert it into that field. And I'll show you that here in a second. So here we are, same kind of thing, loading a static XML document in this case. We'll take a look at how that works. And you see what we've done is we've pulled the data from, you'll see I've used my browser to open up the file called FM results set right on my desktop. And since the Flash file and the XML were on this basically the same root level, which is my desktop, it knew where to find this. Otherwise, I would have to modify the path accordingly. So, okay, so what have we established here? I'm sort of holding my cards a little bit here. But what I've established is that we can load static text into Flash. Great. And I've established here that XML is better. And you want to use the XML object, which I encourage you to learn more about even after this session. And if you're interested in some resources, I'm glad to help out with that as well. But the key here is, like I was saying earlier with the text, a text can't be networked. Text in some cases has limitations on how much data can actually be stored within it. The text changes cannot be easily distributed to other users. And that's where a database comes into play. So let's say instead of storing all our data in a text file that we've got on a server somewhere here. Actually, let me open this up. Let's say we create a database instead. So we've got a bunch of names, first names and last names that we're storing inside of a database. And instead of putting it on a text file that nobody can have access to, we're going to create a database of this. So I've created a database, and I'll show you how easy it is. This is FileMaker Pro. And in this case, I happen to have a server that's set up on this machine. And I've created a little file here that I've called FMF, which could stand for FileMaker Flash, if we want to. So this is a database. Real easy, very palatable stuff, non-threatening. It's got Apple stuff going on, all Aqua and everything, so we like it, right? This is how easy it is to set up a database. And if you want some resources on learning a little bit more about FileMaker, but this is all you'll have to do to actually work with Flash and FileMaker together, set up a database to do this. So you'll notice you can create a new database and save it anywhere you'd like. And the first thing that it asks you to do is define some fields, kind of like you would do inside Excel or any other kind of application. I can just use some plain English to create my two fields that are going to store the first names and the last names. And I can get back to that at some other point. Now, it allows me to create layouts here as well. I'll go into what FileMaker calls the layout mode. And I'm going to name this layout the web layout. And you'll see in a second when we start working with some URL strings why I'm doing that. And then I can start adding data. Whoops, not in Spotlight, but here. It's just that easy to create a database, okay? So now I've got this database, and I want to share it and make it accessible to other network users. And I don't want to downplay the power of FileMaker here, but I do want to show you that it's very easy to get started with this. And by the way, if you're interested in playing around with this, if you go by the FileMaker booth, I'm pretty sure, because they always are, but they'll give you a free 30-day trial of FileMaker, a little disk, and you can play around with this and do this very type of thing. And experiment a little bit with the Flash and the FileMaker files that I'm sending you. And then there's just a couple, the only complicated part, what I just opened up is called defining accounts and privileges. And what FileMaker database, what you do here inside FileMaker is it allows you to say what type of other technologies, which in FileMaker we call those extended privileges. But it says, do I want to share this on, via ODBC or JDBC? Have another application pull data out of FileMaker or push data into FileMaker using ODBC or JDBC connections? Or do I want to be able to put this database up on the network? And you see that's the second one here, FileMaker Network. Or do I want this to be accessible from a FileMaker mobile device? Which should have an interesting impact after this week's announcement. But the one that we're interested in is I want to be able to access this database using XML or through a request for XML that gets sent to this database, and I want the database to be able to respond with an XML document. And that's the key part, the key role of the database here. Receive a query from Flash, and then respond to that query with an XML document. And once these are enabled inside your file, you can take your file, and I'm going to do like a little Julia Child's cooking show thing, and then you pull it out of the oven, and boom, boom, here it is. But in this case, you put it on a server. And I got a copy of FileMaker Server here. And what FileMaker Server allows you to do is share this database with all sorts of different people. Dozens and dozens and dozens of people. Or more specifically, 250 people. I don't want to say dozens, that might be problematic. But literally, up to 250 different people at the same time can share this database. So now we don't have that issue with these text files that only one person has access to at a time. People can update this on the fly, like you saw me doing with the Samuel L. Jackson seating. Anyone else who's logged on using a FileMaker Pro client can see that change that I've made and make changes of their own. And all the while, the server is managing all of this so that nothing's lost, and it's happening instantaneously. So, you know, that's basically what a database server does. So it's not specific FileMaker. Question, Vanna?
Or through a web browser?
Yeah, I'll show you something cool too, where you can also allow people from externally through a web browser to access this as well. So when we get to the airplane seater thing, then you answer the question. God, pay attention during rehearsal. So here we have a database. It's on server, and we've set it up to receive requests in the form of XML. So what does that mean? I'm going to take you over to Firefox for a second here. And actually, let's just switch over here and let me introduce you really quickly. Now we're going to talk about the URL commands, okay? So if you remember, what we need to do to have the exchange of data is we have a Flash application that can compose and send a URL command over to a database. The database, its role is to receive that request, whatever is contained within that request, and then respond back with XML. And then that loop just continues. And then that's how they're actually communicating with each other. Well, so what we see here is we've got, this is FileMaker syntax. And when I told you at the onset of this discussion that any database, you can plug in the specific database syntax and work with the format of the responding XML, and you can do exactly what I'm saying with any database on the back end. So here is FileMakers. It's pretty easy to understand, pretty palatable stuff here. But what the syntax actually is it starts off with your HTTP or HTTPS, depending on whether or not you've got SSL on your web server. And then it has the address. So it reads from left to right, and there's instructions here. What it tells the browser to do is go send this out through TCP, through the worldwide network of servers out there, and find the server that is at the following address, whether it be an IP address or www.google.com. It will then, the domain names will resolve themselves to an IP address, and as we all know, each IP address is unique worldwide. So no matter where I am in the world and I type in this string and I put in that IP address, it will find the server that I want it to find. From there, that server could be running many different web applications. So you see the next thing is the /FMI, this portion right there. And that says, on this server at this address, go find the FileMaker server. And then when you find that FileMaker server, you see where it says XML and then fmresultset.xml? Actually, come to think of it, I probably shouldn't have named that sample XML document fmresultset.xml, because actually what that is what's called a grammar. Each database has its own grammar. Even some industries have their own grammar. And what it is, it's just a flavor of XML. You'll see the XML that FileMaker feeds back, and when you work with other databases, you'll look at that XML, and you'll see it's essentially the same kind of concept, but they're different flavors. It's almost like speaking the same language of English, but having very distinct different dialects. So possibly when Milo and I are talking to each other, and he's from Boston, which is why I'm picking on him, and maybe someone from the South, they might be speaking English, but you might not know all the terminology together. I'm, of course, being dramatic. I apologize for that, but it's the grammar or the flavor, the dialect of the XML. So all I'm saying is go to that web server, find the XML or FileMaker components, And when you respond using this flavor of XML. And then the rest of it is find the database that's on that server. Because there could be multiple databases that are being hosted up there, but I just want to find the one with the specific name. And then within there, you see -lay. That's where you're actually finding the table. So a FileMaker file can have up to 1 million different tables embedded inside of it. They can all be related together or independent of each other. And this allows me to find the actual table within the file by declaring what layout. And then finally, it's followed by a command. And we're going to look at a couple of those commands. So it could look like HTTP 127.0.0.1, which of course is my local loopback server here, /FMI/XML. I declare the FM result set, and I say look for a database file that's called ICE, and within it look for a table that I've named web. So you remember when I just created that database file, I named my layout web, because instead of having every single field that I define inside my database all on that layout, even though I'm only working with first name and last name, I've created a special layout that only has first name and last name on it, because those are the only ones I want to work with from within my Flash application, or even on the web in this case. Otherwise, in the XML, it's going to return back everything. So if you wonder, how do I just choose first name and last name field inside my return XML? Well, define a layout inside the database that only has those fields in it. And then just say, give me everything that's on that layout. So in this case, it's going to return all the records in the web layout, or all the records in the ICE file using the fields that are defined on the web layout. And since I put find all at the end, that's one of the commands that's going to find everything. And let me just prep something here for you. And just so you know, you've seen, this shouldn't be too entirely foreign. If I go back to the Google example, if we go to Google and we type in my name and we hit OK, you'll see that Google's got its own syntax, right? So it's saying go to the server that's located, that resolves itself at the DNS for Google, wherever they're, whatever actual IP address that points to. And you see their syntax is a little bit different. They say /search, HL equals, and then they're saying, English, I believe that's the language that they're using. And then they put an ampersand, and then the query follows it. And then there's parameters in there, Cris plus Ippolite, and then they close that out again with another ampersand. So whatever database they've got on the back end, and keep in mind that it's pretty common in web application programming that you don't necessarily show everything in your URL command either. There's ways that you can hide these things or subdue these things so that the user doesn't see them. But here you can see Google's got its own, FileMaker's got its own. But what happens if I actually point to now here I am, I'm pointing back to my machine. This is where my web server is at 127.0.0.1. I'm calling my FileMaker server, and I'm asking it to prepare an XML document using the FM result set grammar and find the database called FMF and give me all the data for the fields that are on the layout web. Find all of them. And in this case I have, if we go back to the database, here's the database, here's the layout web. You see I've got 2 fields on there. There's only 1 record in the database, so it returned back the 1 record. And it returned it back to me in XML. And not only can you find all those records, but watch the number of records here in this database. Here's how the syntax would change. Move it over just a little bit more. How the syntax would change if I wanted to add a record instead. So it's the same thing at the beginning. Everything's pretty much the same past where the web is. But here it's saying instead put inside, I want to add it, so I put a -new at the end. So I've got inside the first name field, put the values CRIS, and inside the last name field, put the values, Ippolite. Kind of like Google did when it was saying search, but here I'm saying add. So if you watch, this is actually the database up on the server, and if you watch that there, when I go ahead and execute this, it created another record in the database using those parameters. And then it returned back, even when it adds a record, this is important, it still gives me some XML back. Every command you can send will give you some responding XML. And you can use that either to confirm what you've just done, like in this case I've just got confirmation from the database that I've added a record. Or if you're doing a search, obviously the whole reason you're searching is to get that data back so that you can do something with it. But there's an important piece of information that's in here. Even if you edit or delete something, or if you delete something, it comes back with something. You see this thing called record ID? Well, this is useful in our next step. Let's take a look at what the syntax would be if I wanted to edit. Oh, geez, sorry about that. If I wanted to edit this record instead. So if I want to change the name inside this record from Cris Ippolite to Dude McStyle. Interestingly enough, what I have to do here, first I need to find that record, right? I need to find the record that has Cris Ippolite in it, and then I need to change it. But you can't, inside a URL, one single request, I can't say go find a record and change a record in the same one. So what you use inside URL commands is this record ID down here. And if you call out the record ID inside of an edit or a delete URL command, that's the part that finds the record for you, and then as it goes further down the string, it'll do whatever it is that you want to do to it. So in this case, if you look at what the string looks like, we've got, forgot what that, hold on, let me go back and get that. Was it 132? Yeah, 132. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this string to 132, and we'll see it find record ID number 132 and change the first and last name. And you see that the command at the end is edit, right? So there's that second record has been changed from Cris Ippolite to Dude McStyle. And now I can use the same principle to delete a record. Okay, so now we've only got one record in the database. Okay, why am I going through this exercise? What I'm trying to show you again, we're still talking about adding, editing, deleting, and finding records in a table, right? Everything that you can do inside of an application, I promise you, there is nothing that you can do on the web or within a database application that does not involve finding, editing, adding, or deleting records, okay? So if I can attach that action to anything inside my Flash application, and literally anything, I can attach the action script to anything that I want, whether it be a button I'm rolling over, button I'm pressing, some value changes and drives my action script. I mean, as you know, as Flash developers as well, that the possibilities are really endless for the type of things that you can attach action script to. And the reason I'm showing you that is because now if we go back to, so does it make sense just in general that these commands can tell the database to do things, and it can have the database do the core things that any application would need us to do? Anybody have any questions on that much of it yet? Okay, good. So, what does that have to do with our Flash? Well, we've established that a database can be shared. It can be networked in local area networks or wide area networks or even over the web. Basically, any TCP node in the world that has access to the server where that database is running can access this data. Update it live, and the servers can manage, like in FileMaker's case, up to 250 concurrent users. And other database, enterprise-level database applications allow hundreds of thousands of concurrent users, and they're priced accordingly too. So I just want to put that in there. So that's great. That's where our data is stored. I got my live data. Everyone can get access to it. It can be updated instantly. So that problem is solved. But I need to be able to pull that data into Flash. And so we can do this through the XML documents, because we know that the database then can respond to a URL command with an XML document. So now all I need to do is load that XML document into my Flash, right? And then parse it out. I mean, not to oversimplify the task, but you can see that I'm assigning the action script to this button, and I can load that XML in there. But you might be thinking to yourself, okay, I kind of get it, but where does this FM result set, where does this XML document actually live? Is it on the server somewhere, or where? Well, the cool part is here, I can essentially trick Flash. See where I'm declaring where the XML file is? It's not a file. It's not an XML file on my server. I'm actually going to put in the whole URL command. So if I go back into here, and we're doing the add record, I can literally take this entire string, although I've added another record. Let me just get rid of that real quick. And if this, if this was my action script, I just paste that same stuff down here. Actually, if we look at the action script, you'll see it's the same thing. See here? So I don't have a static XML file. I'm making it dynamic now. I'm saying when you load the XML file, when this person presses on the go button, go out, follow these instructions, and it will load the XML document that responds. So it doesn't have to be a local static file that's milling around on your server somewhere. It can be fully dynamic. And it will give you a snapshot at that millisecond in time what the state of that record is inside of your database, or how many different records there are. So now, in this case, if we look at our database, oh, got rid of the wrong record. Okay, so we've got our one record, Alex Ippolite, and let's test this movie, but let's make it so we can see the database too. So there's the database down here. Let me get my SWF. Oh, geez. All right, kind of cheating a little bit there. So now I'm going to click on this Go button, and the Go button is then going to load my XML file, which is actually a URL command that's going and talking to a database. And it's coming back, and you see it's added the record to the database now through Flash, in the same way as it did with the URL command. So the next stage of this is, okay, that's great. We've just made it so you've got a button that every time you hit it, it adds the record, it adds Cris Ippolite to this database. Now, as much as I would like that, especially if this is like a lottery winner database that you're creating, it doesn't really make much sense. We don't want to hard code in the value of what the first name and the last name are, right? So that's where the next stage comes into play. Letting the user interact with the URL string itself. Let them put the parameters inside the string. Some of it we want them to leave alone, okay? We definitely want them to leave everything alone that goes all the way up until where we're saying, where the database is, what the layout is, name of the tables, all that kind of stuff, right? And then we say what the field is. But here you see I've added two input text fields, which are as easy as just simply going on to, you're picking the location where you want to add the field and just dropping the field on there, choosing it as input text, and naming the variable, and I'm naming it first name, and you could probably guess what I'm naming this other one, last name. Okay? And what that's going to do then, now let's take a look at the action script here, because it takes on a little bit different. Okay, notice how, and the colors help us here too. Obviously inside ActionScript, those colors are actually useful to us here. You'll see that in green is my string. But where it used to say Cris and where it used to say Ippolite, what have I got there? I'm dropping in the variables for first name and last name. So what I'm doing here is I'm still composing the URL string, but what I'm saying is take whatever the user typed in the first name field and whatever the user typed in the last name field, and using the name value pair concept. You guys familiar with that from other kind of web application work? Well, that's what we're doing. We're inserting the value dynamically into the string and then sending that over. And the same thing is happening here on the tail end. So let's take a look at how that works. Again, there's our database with two records down here. And let's create that record. And so here's 3 records. But this time now the user they can just come up with whatever they want. It doesn't have to be hard-coded into the system. So we've got these records being created and added to a dynamic database where someone else can then retrieve this data from the database, all using Flash and this combination of these URL commands. So, I mean, I know we can really, dig much deeper into this, but what I wanted to impress upon you was the basic concepts involved in the communication between these two applications. Yes, question?
If you're
Well, yes and no. Now, the question for those of you that didn't hear it is, if you're familiar with interacting with the same database on a network where you've got the clients, and if, let's say you're logged onto one client and you type in Vanna White, or you select a record and you change Vanna to Joe White, and I'm on my client and I can see right on screen it changes to Joe White from Vanna White, and I don't have to go refresh it or anything. Now, your question is a good one, is that does the Flash application automatically change because we know we might need to refresh here? Well, that's where the key is with this Java class that I talked about before. It'll actually detect that there's been a change in the table and push it out to anybody. And if someone happens to be looking at that record, or in the case of the seating chart, all of the records, that change will be pushed out to them as well. So Flash is acting as the client in that case too. Question?
Are you putting that JavaScript in within 3 months?
That's actually on the server side. So that's actually loaded and running on the server. Yeah. So I just open up a terminal window, blast in there. You know, I open up a socket is what it actually is. So it's a live, persistent connection from my web server over to the database server. However you want to set it up. You know, that gets into a whole other way of setting up the classes. So if your application calls for the refreshing of the data and you don't have the logic built in that you're constantly looking for obviously adding records, we don't need that, do we? But we need it when we're looking at a bunch of displayed values on screen. But it's an important point. Now it is a snapshot. So of course the other part is when I'm modifying this piece of data, we're talking about milliseconds here. So certainly someone else who's on that record would, to see my change, whatever it is, same kind of thing. But this is facilitated through either the logic that you're building into the interface itself, as far as the flow of the information, how people have access to it, or you can use the Java class in the back end. And that's not another app that you have to buy and all this stuff. That's just something free that runs on your web server. And you can install that on both platforms. I happen to be running it on OS X here with Apache, using Apache, but a similar class can be installed inside Windows and run as well. And you can open up multiple different sockets. So if you have a ton of different applications all being served off your same server, and you want to manage sort of the traffic and the access, open up a different socket. Because in there you say what the port number would be. So I just happen to declare a port number of a certain number, and I can go and open up another socket and name it something else, so I can have all sorts of applications communicating in there. It's a pretty cool function. Actually, that's probably the killer tip of the day, is if you're going to build applications with Flash and FileMaker or any database on the back end, get Java involved for pushing out those changes in the exchanges. Okay, so what we're able to do is let the user interact with the data, whether through motion of the cursor by clicking on things or moving or rolling over or whatever, or actually typing values in. You could build an entire store inside of Flash this way, and you could have them search for your products, right? There's a search. They locate a product, and they can then add that product to another table that contains all the line items for their order. Or they've made a mistake, or let's say they want to change the quantity. You can then have Flash go and locate that one record inside their order line items table and change the quantity from 1 to hopefully like 1,000 of whatever it is you're selling. And then they get a little bit of cold feet, or they don't get spousal approval, and then they have to delete the record, right? So there's a perfect example of a store. All of these activities, add, edit, delete, search, again, it's some combination of those things, and all this can be done inside Flash. Now finally, I'm not going to go too far into this, because if you're getting this now, I don't want to actually look away if you're just barely on the edge of understanding everything right now. No, not everybody at the same time. But what I wanted to introduce to you is that we're not stuck with just parsing out one record that gets returned from a database. If I do a product search and I say, give me FileMaker online training videos, and there's like 50 of them in this store, it's going to come back with 50 different records, right? So in that case, what I'm doing, if you look, let me try to zoom this in just a little bit more. Oh, that might be a little bit too much. Let's look at the actual action script here. Oops. Bear with me. Okay, and I'll show you. All we're doing, for those of you, anybody in here, show of hands, work with FileMaker? Nice. Oh, wow. I'm so sorry I went through the whole how to create a FileMaker database thing. I apologize. So what's going on here, you know how you create a script inside FileMaker and you search for a bunch of records and you loop through all those records? You set a counter and that tells you when you're done with your found set. That's the same thing that we're doing here. So here we're just doing the same kind of declarations. You know, I've chosen to call this totals.xml. It loads all the data, does a find all, and then on the load, we just do a couple things here that say if there's some values at this particular node, parse out those values and otherwise do failed to load. But here's the thing that looks kind of like a loop. So I equals 0. And if I is greater than the total number of nodes, which means the total number of records in your found set if you're doing a FileMaker script, for example, then proceed until they're equal and then it stops, right? Same kind of thing with a looping script, but you can do that inside of Flash. I didn't want to go too far into that concept only because it's a little, you know, it's a little heady, but real quickly, how are we parsing this data out? Okay, let me switch over. All right, we're going to close on looking at how we're parsing this data out. Okay, so we saw the XML that comes in, right? This is the XML, and I was talking about how, you know, the indenting and all that stuff is important to the syntax here. Well, I'm going to introduce you to something that's called the document object model. Okay? Now, there are other alternatives here. If you're already familiar with XML and you've got your head wrapped around the tag language and the syntax of XML, 5 minutes, then go with something that's called XPath, okay? But if you're new to this, I'm introducing you to the document object model. It's a XML thing. It's not a FileMaker thing or a Flash thing or anything like that. It's an XML thing. I'm saying get familiar with that because what it does, it uses terms. There are a couple different terms. There's the root, which if you understand the concept of the root, which means the document itself is the root. There's always only one of the root. You've probably heard the term root when you're talking about directory structure. That's the, you know, the highest level, or your starting point is the root. So from the root, the very first line is your root. So that's what's called the first child. And there's these terms called, there's children and there's siblings. Okay, and they use those terms because they're the relationship to the root. So the root, you see how the line is indented below it? There we go. A little bit slow. But this next element down here, the error code equals 0, well, that's actually the child of the root. So it shows up in the XML or the XML document as one line down and one across. Okay, that's how it indicates that it's a child, which means that it's an attribute of the root. Okay, in database speak, it's like a field of a file type thing. But if you string together first child, and you see I put a little dot inside there, these strings are delimited with periods in the case of the document object model. If I say first child dot first child, what that tells me without even looking at the document, once you get the hang of this a little bit, you can say, okay, well it's going to be the second line indented 1 from the root. And that would give me the error code value. What if I wanted the next line? My fade's a little slow here, I apologize. You see how now we go down to the third line that says product build? So it's first child gets us down to that second line, but product is not indented from error code. So instead of product being an attribute of error code, it is a fellow attribute of the root, which is described as a sibling. You know, kind of like your brother and sister, you're both on the same level. I mean, I know mom, dad always likes someone else better, but in XML, it's an equal playing field. So you're either a child of the element or you're a sibling of it. And all that means to you, without having to learn, you know, more complicated XML dialogue, that just means that each time I put a period, that means I'm going a line down, okay? And if I say first child, that means it's indenting 1. That's all it means. And if I do a period to go down to another line and I say next sibling, that means it's going down 1 and it's not indenting. That's it. So as scary as that string looked inside the Flash, and you'll have these inside the Flash files here in a second, Notice at the very end I say node value. So now we're down here, and I apologize, it's maybe not quite as clear as I had hoped. But you see down here, I'm identifying through first child, next sibling, next sibling, next sibling, first child, first child, first child. I'm getting down to that data point, and I'm saying give me the node value there. So that whole string right there points right to the piece of data that comes in the XML document. And the nice thing is, every XML document you'll get back from FileMaker that points to this layout is going to actually have the same exact syntax. So anytime I load a record, no matter what the data is that's in there, that string will get me to that node every time. And so here's the node for the last name field. Now, real quick, you'll see where those come into play. See down here? I'm saying in this field, I want you to put the value that's found at the end of this string. You know, follow everything I just discussed. Oh, it's not working out real well. Down to the node value and load that node value. This is called the document object model. And I encourage you to, certainly learn a little bit more about that. I can give you some resources if you're interested after the session. So the idea, to sort of encapsulate what we're talking about here, we're saying Flash can send a URL query, and in that query, the user, by the way, can modify what the query is and give their own specific commands. The database can receive those commands, perform the operation that's found inside the command, and respond back with an XML document. Flash, in turn, can load that XML document and then parse out the individual nodes that it needs. So, believe it or not, back to our... Well, this will actually give me a chance to show you some... Oh, lovely. I apparently have been pirated. Let me show you this other thing here. But if I show you another example of a Flash application, you'll see that, well, I'll show you my little airplane seater thing that I was talking about with Jeffrey earlier. Oh, this one's pretty cool, actually. I shouldn't go with my recent, hold on. So what you're doing is you're actually going to search on a database, find all, and when I parse out those little nodes, in this example here, you're going to see I can plot those nodes into a seating chart for an airplane. Okay? This one I kind of like. It's sort of a fun one. It's sort of a similar take on... I'll just show you two quick examples before we end here. And I'll stick around and answer any questions that you guys have, and if you've got some sort of more anecdotal stuff, I'm happy to work with you on that too. But here's a FileMaker database where I've put a web viewer. You know, those are new to 8.5. I just dropped a web viewer that points to a web server that's got an SWF file in it. And now you'll see it just queried a database table that gives me the location of all the people that are seated. And when I roll over them, actually let me expand this out a little bit. When I roll over them, it gives me all the information in the record. So it says, find this record and show me the data, or I can add it. If we go back to this view, let's see, we're on Julie Hyde, okay? So let's go into the passenger list, and there's Julie Hyde. Let's give her an exit row. Very long legs, she needs an exit row. And you see it added the Julie Hyde to what row? 27C. Maybe Julie doesn't want to be in 27C. She likes the window more. So let's switch that. And now did you see down here that the data changed instantly, 27A? And this is a Flash application embedded inside the database, but all it's really doing is just communicating back to the server to these same tables. We just happen to be on the table. So again, a find, an add, and actually, in this case, a delete. And see, the record is gone. So same kind of concept as what we've already been talking about. And then the last one that I'll show you is another thing that we've done for the Academy, which is kind of a cool use of FileMaker. And that is actually in, remember this, in 2 Tuesdays, not this coming Tuesday, but the following one, at 5 o'clock in the morning, they announce who got nominated for the Oscars, okay? They do this every year. It's a miserable day for me because I will have just spent the night at the academy trying to make sure that all this stuff works properly. And what they used to do is they would have a whiteboard with magnets, and they'd print out on a piece of paper what the names of the possible nominees would be, and then the ones that actually get nominated when Price Waterhouse shows up with their big reams of paper and such, they would cut them out and glue them and put them on a whiteboard, and they'd get all the studios like Paramount and Miramax and Disney and all those into a room like this big, and they'd have a little tiny whiteboard about this large, and everyone would do a lottery. Because what they do is they screen all these movies for the voters. You know, you heard about that DVD thing? Well, they also screen them so that everybody gets a chance to see it. And they all want to jockey for like the Saturday nights and the Friday nights to make sure that more people can see it and therefore they can get their Oscars. Well, the problem is they would, again, their database system was this magnetic whiteboard with the name on it, and they would say, Paramount, you're up. What movie do you want? Okay, well, I want, or New Line, you're up. Which one of your Best Picture nominations do you want? Oh, I'll take my Best Picture nomination to Snakes on the Plane, and I want it to be shown on Friday, you know, the first Friday when I think everyone's going to view it. And then at the end, they carefully carry that magnetic whiteboard upstairs, and then they put it into a FileMaker database, and they export it out into Word, and they open it up in this thing, and then they open it up in Quark, and then they do a bunch of formatting in Quark, and then they export the file out. Well, what we did instead was we added a web viewer with a calendar with a bunch of slots that they can click on and drag and move these things around. You see I just edited a record right there in a database. And notice that when I'm clicking on some of these things, see how this whole day got white? I've built business rules in here that say if this film is playing in another theater somewhere in town, we can't schedule it in the same place because there's only one can is what they call it. There's only one actual film reel. So instead of having to mark down, oh yeah, this one's playing in the other theater that day, I just built that into the Flash and it does all the work for us. So then at the end, we go in and we hit this button here, Save to Quark, and using FileMaker Pro's XSLT transformation feature, it literally spits out a Quark file that prints this schedule. The whole process used to take an entire day, and it takes 2 hours now for them to do that. Both with the combination of Flash, providing this front end, and by the way, since we're all in a theater anyways for this case, what we're able to do, because Flash is a vector graphic, we project this thing up onto a huge movie screen so everybody can see it. And they can clearly see what days are free and what other movies are playing on that day and that type of thing. So FileMaker Flash and transformation of FileMaker Flash saves the day every morning on nominations morning, so you can remember that when you hear that Snakes on the Plane is the Best Picture nomination this year. So again, okay, here's the website. Since I know that half of you kindly stuck around. By the way, I wrote a white paper on the web viewer and that you can get on, it's called a tech brief and it's on FileMaker.com. And there was also, if you go to advisor.com, I actually wrote an article on Flash and the web viewer. Or you can go to iSolutions if you want. But the website, FileMakerFlash.com. Easy one to remember, FileMakerFlash.com. You'll see a link on the top of the page that says click here for session files or something along those lines. And in there will be all those Flash files that we looked at, the sample FileMaker file, and I've even included like a 20-page white paper that I wrote that goes through in detail everything that we've talked about today. And a lot more information on that document object model stuff, all that stuff. So I didn't expect it to all be digested here in this room today. But all the files, the white paper, the full deal will be at your disposal. And I even did an online title for a company called lynda.com, Lynda.com, if you're familiar with them. And I just recorded it last Thursday and Friday. But everything I just showed you today, it's like a 4-hour-long online title if you want to check that out in a few months, right around the Oscars, ironically. And my email address is here. It's Cris at iSolutions-inc.com. I just want to make sure I spelled that right. And please, any questions that you've got or anything at all, by all means. The only thing I can't answer is who's going to get nominated for Best Actor. I don't know. I don't have access to that information at all. But I appreciate you guys sticking around a couple extra minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to come on up. Thanks a lot for your attention.